So if we talk about types of things that cause cancer, many of these things you've probably heard of before. There are a number of chemicals that certainly cause cancer. Some of these you probably are very familiar with. Tobacco products can cause cancer, asbestos, radon. There are certainly other chemicals as well. And anytime we have a chemical that causes cancer, we call it a carcinogen. Okay, so if you've heard of a carcinogen before, that's basically just saying that that chemical has the potential to cause cancer. There are some viruses and bacteria that have been shown to be responsible for causing cancer. The human papilloma virus is one that you hear quite a lot about these days because there is a vaccination to vaccinate people against that virus, which can potentially lower some cancer risk later on in life. And then another potential cause is radiation. This can be UV radiation, so radiation from the sun or from tanning beds, and then also excessive X-rays would fall into that category as well. Now, while all of those things are things that we find in our environment, heredity, diet, and hormones also do play a big role in, or they play a role in causing cancer. A lot of times people are most concerned with whether or not cancer runs in their family, but this middle part here is really only responsible for about 10% of cancers. So what that means is that 90% of cancers are due to some kind of environmental exposure to chemicals, viruses, bacteria, radiation, things of that nature. So those may be intentional or unintentional exposures, but they are causing about 90% of cancers. So if we look at what these cancer-causing agents are actually doing, they are going to be impacting our DNA. So our DNA is inside of our nucleus. It does have a specific sequence to it, and by saying that it has a specific sequence, this means that the nitrogenous bases that we find within the DNA are in a specific order. So we have A's, T's, C's, and G's there, and what these agents are capable of doing is basically causing changes in our DNA. Anytime we have a change in the DNA, we refer to that change as a mutation. Okay, so a mutation is nothing more than saying that the DNA is changed. Okay, so it's not what it used to be. The problem here is that the DNA is our blueprint for anything that the cell might really need to do throughout its lifetime. So when we change the DNA, it may be a very small change. There may be an extra base that's added. There may be some deletions. There may be one letter that gets switched to another. But that is the blueprint for making something, which means that we may not be able to make really a working molecule anymore. Within our cells, as far as humans are concerned, they estimate that we have about 25,000 genes. So those 25,000 genes are not all going to be responsible for regulating the cell cycle by any means, but there are some that will be responsible for it. So we do have some genes that tell us how to make CDKs, or they tell us how to make cyclins, or how to sense the neighboring hormones that cells are producing. So those genes are very critical that they be working all of the time for us to really have a properly running cell cycle. These genes are going to be what we call oncogenes. So oncogenes are basically necessary for regulating the cell cycle. So with these genes, if they are disrupted, then we run the potential of getting a cell that's basically dividing out of control. Now keep in mind that when we do have changes occur to the DNA, it's a random change. So it may or may not actually disrupt or mess up one of these genes. Since it is a random change in the DNA, usually one damaged area to the DNA is not going to cause you to have a cancer cell there. And we said with one cell, if it's damaged, really it's supposed to undergo this cell suicide or this apoptosis. And if that happens, then we have no problem at all, because that cell will die off and we'll have a normal cell that's going to actually take its place. If the cell does not die off, it may not divide uncontrollably. But if it does hang around, the risk is that we can have other changes, other damage that occur to that particular cell. So if we have a second change there, that may not cause it to be out of control. But if it doesn't die off, we can potentially get a third change and a fourth change, or more changes after that. And the more changes or the more damage that is accumulated within a cell, the greater the risk that this is now going to be a cell that divides uncontrollably, and we get that mass of cells that we refer to as a tumor. This is really why early detection is key here. So in this picture, we're looking at a cancer of the skin. So notice that this does start as one initial cell that has a problem, but it is a cell that does not die off. So since it does not die off, it can divide and produce a larger group of cells. These cells are, in this case, on our skin, so they're certainly going to be exposed to a lot of things in our environment, things that could cause more damage to these cells. And if damage continues to happen, then we run the risk that this is going to turn into one of those tumors that is then going to spread. And we're going to get metastasis or metastasizing take place, where the cells are actually breaking off and they're spreading to other locations. Notice that if we had actually gone in at any point before here and that tumor had been removed, then there would not be any problem. Okay, so it would not have spread to other locations in the body. This slide right here just shows you, for a couple different cancer types, colon and breast cancer, that the risk of these does increase with age. So the older a person gets, the higher the risk that they're going to be diagnosed with some type of cancer. And if you think about some of the people perhaps you've known to have cancer, generally speaking, it is older people. There are some childhood cancers, but that is not the majority of cancer cases. So, for example, if you had a person in their 20s, the risk is very low that they're going to be diagnosed with breast cancer. As you get into someone that's 60 years old or 80 years old as well, the risk is going to go up quite a lot. The reason here is that every day of our lives we're basically exposed to things in our environment. And these are things that could potentially cause some damage to our DNA. So as we age, we are accumulating changes within our DNA, and this accumulation of changes can cause a cell to basically start dividing out of control. If you look at very old individuals, 80, 90 years old, then there is a really good chance that you are going to find some cancer somewhere within their body. But generally when we get to those ages, there are other health issues there, so that does not become the big concern. This last slide here is really just a summary slide. It's showing us some of the most common cancers that we have in the U.S. and the estimated deaths that we have. And this is on a yearly basis. Keep in mind that there are hundreds of types of cancer. There are multiple types of bladder cancer and breast cancer, colon cancer, for example. Notice that some of these cancers are much more deadly than others. If we just point out down here that the one that happens to be the most prevalent, that's going to be skin cancer. So notice there's over 1 million new cases of skin cancer diagnosed every year. But then if we look over here at the estimated deaths, it's actually less than 2,000, which makes this one of the least deadly types of cancers. One of the reasons for this happens to be that it is on our skin. So this is something that is visible to us. We can notice changes in this. And then you also have the ability to get those things taken care of. So early detection is really key with a lot of these. If you know that there is a problem, going, seeing someone and getting it taken care of can certainly lower the risk. Now I have posted links to look further into cancer if you do have some special interest in that. It really is all about the cell cycle and cells not properly being regulated. And so you have that background now from Chapter 12, so you should be able to understand a lot of the resources that are available on the internet or that you would find in journals in the library.